Hey, Jim. Glad to have you. So now that we've got the full cast of characters here, we're going to start today's Culture Think Tank Weekly Roundup. So welcome to the Culture Think Tank, where we discuss the trends and analytics of culture facing us today. Our goal is to help provide insights and best practices organizations and leaders can use to strengthen their cultures during today's new normal. I'm Will Lindstrom, and today our panels are going to review Jim Erben's results from this week's Pulse Poll. So before we get started, I'd just like to introduce everybody. Today with me, we have Rob Nielsen, CEO of All American Leadership out of Irvine, California. We have Cynthia Curiazis, the author of Amazon bestseller, Get Organized, Get Focused, Get Moving, and CEO of Productivity Partners out of Kansas City. And we have Delise Crimmin, CEO of Design Learning out of San Antonio, Texas. And we also have, as I mentioned earlier, Jim Erben joining us, who I'll let Delise introduce once we get started. What's exciting about today, and what I'm really excited about to be able to show you, is today we actually get to look at the analytics of Jim's results. Jim has been so gracious to be willing to share the results of his Pulse polls that he's been conducting with his organization. And what that's going to allow us to do is it's going to allow us to look at his results. And so what we're going to be showing you here today, you can find on the culturethinktank.com website. And as you join as a member, you get access to the public-facing polls, which we'll talk about in a moment. And you also gain access to your own members, where you can actually pulse your organization and see the analytics and compare those against the global summary. So at that point, I'll just say good morning to everybody and let Delise introduce Jim.
Thanks, Will. Good morning, Jim. Glad you're here. Jim has been on our program before, and I've worked with his organization over the past almost year, helping with their culture and establish their values and behaviors. And about 4 or 5 months into establishing that, this COVID crisis hit. And Jim, you've got your workforce dispersed. Remind us a little bit about how you've dispersed your workforce and what that looked like.
Well, before Austin, so we're based in Austin, Texas. Before Austin went with the, shutdown, the staff made a decision that I needed to get out of town. They didn't want me exposed. They wanted me to be able to manage from wherever I was going to be. So we shut down a day early. Actually, we wound up shutting down a couple of days early, and everybody has been dispersed and is working from home. We've had some experience because we've been preparing for people to work at home for the last 2 years.
Okay. And I didn't completely introduce you. You're the CEO of Erben Associates, which is a firm that specializes in exit planning for small business and small businesses and family-owned businesses, really?
Yeah, small to medium-sized, privately held businesses in 26 states.
Okay, great. What was your biggest concern about having a dispersed workforce, about having people work separately and remotely?
Keeping the vibrancy of the group, probably. Okay. So a little history on us working remote. We have a video system called LifeSize that we use. And so sometimes when people would go on vacation, or they'd go up and see family, I've got one of our chief planner went to Maine to see his father who had been ill, and he wanted to work remote, and he was very productive then. So every single person in the organization has spent a lot of time not preparing for a crisis like this, but just being adept at working remotely. And it has been very successful. We've introduced clients to this in the last 2 years, and it has cut down my travel about 40%. So my biggest initial challenge was to make sure everybody knew we were going to be okay. We wanted to set guidelines on what we were going to accomplish each week. We wanted to have some fun. We've incorporated happy hours. We've incorporated costume happy hours. We've had a birthday party. We've had some lunches where people come and go. So we've done a variety of things like that just to kind of keep things light while everybody's trying not to go insane by staying at home.
Great. Well, yeah, I know your team well, and fun is definitely something that you guys do exceptionally well, which is no surprise if you know Jim Erben. So we want to talk, we had you do this pulse poll. So kind of for the group that's listening in, when you register, you do this poll, which is the global results, which you can see on the dashboard right now, which is 198. But additionally, we had Jim's firm fill out their own separate pulse poll. So it allows him to compare where his organization is just for him to get a snapshot. But then he can also compare it to everyone else out there and see how he's doing vis-a-vis the rest of the world during this time of crisis. So Jim, I've shared some of these results with you, but we want to go over this dashboard with you, get your feedback. And Rob and Cynthia have their own expertise that we're going to have them weigh in, really to kind of help you figure out, based on the information from your team, how can you use that information to help your employees do this better, be better. Okay, so Rob, we'll bring you and Cynthia in to lend a hand for this. But Will, do you want to talk about where we are on the dashboard? Just explain that.
Yeah, sure. So where we are right now is we're looking at the global summary, which everybody can see. And what this really allows us to do is we've broken the analytics down into 3 big functions. So the first is the connecting index, which really gives you a view of how are people feeling, and are those feelings that are going to be pulling people apart? In other words, are they feeling distanced from the organization or distancing from the organization? Or are those feelings of connecting? Because as leaders and as organizations try to manage their workforce, obviously we want to take steps like Jim was talking about how to bring people together so that people are more connected. And so if we just highlight what the disconnecting behaviors are, disconnecting feelings, you can see right away that anxious is floated right to the top, followed by uncertain, stressed, and overwhelmed, which I think are some really good behavior, or really good insights, and kind of consistent with what we're seeing overall. But I think where, as Delise has been working with Jim, what's interesting is that Jim's able to kind of break this down and see which of these behaviors overall, so for example, anxious, is obviously a priority, and in Jim's situation, it's also one of those feelings that is consistent. But now as we look at Jim's, we can actually break down and take a look at what are the things, or what are the concerns within the organization, or the feelings within the organizations that are causing some separation or some things to focus on. So, obviously anxiety or anxiousness is one of the biggest ones.
Okay, just as a understanding of where we are in the website, that the first global summary with the 198 was everyone's feedback, and where you are right now is actually just Erben Associates, their specific data.
Correct. Yep.
So as we look at that, Jim, one of the disconnecting words that comes up is anxiety for your team, which, given where we are, I think everyone can tap into anxiety and understand that that's a common feeling for all of us. How have you seen anxiety in your team members, or have you?
Well, yes, I have. One of the things that I decided to do very early on was be extremely 100% transparent in the financial impact to the firm. That included me stop taking salary 1st of April, as well as 2 days ago. Let them know what I was applying for, when it was expected to come in, reassuring everybody that everyone was going to be okay. I have not spoken about any compensation cuts. I have not considered any furloughs or anything else. I've been extremely proactive in doing everything I know to do from the SBA and other sources. And, I'm telling everybody, just keep doing what you're doing. Here are some things you can do personally to push off mortgage payments, auto payments, things of that nature, helping them out financially. And we're going to be okay. But I get that you're anxious. I'm anxious. I understand.
Okay. Rob and Cynthia, Rob, how do you, in your experience, how anxiety influences and affects trust? Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, it's the timing for this is interesting. We completed a program yesterday, Southern California Fire Leadership Academy. So we have fire professionals, firefighters, fire captains from across Southern California that participated in a day-long event with us. And one of the things that we talk about is the state of flow, and where we talk about productivity and learning and growth in that flow environment. And when the degree of challenge and the degree of complexity are too high, you immediately go to that place of anxiety or anxiousness. And so it's not at all surprising to see that in this week's poll globally, for Jim, for your organization, that the degree of challenge and the degree of anxiety is kind of pegging off the meter. And that is an absolute stereotypical outcome when people are feeling that level of challenge. And as it pertains to trust, it's incumbent upon us as leaders to figure out how can we mitigate that degree of challenge. And as I was listening to the things that you're doing, Jim, it's funny, we're doing a program next week specifically on getting trust right now. And we've done some polling on social media, a couple of hundred participants to this point, where we asked the specific question, the last 3 weeks, what has a leader or a boss specifically done that built trust with you? And looking at all of the results that came back in, interestingly, we break them down into 3 categories. We call them the 3 C's: caring, competence, and character. Those things that leaders did that fall into the caring category outnumbered the competence and the character ones combined. And so when you talk about, hey, I'm going to have a really candid conversation with you, and this is where we're at, this is what's going to happen, that built trust. Listening to remote Zoom happy hours and birthday parties and things like that, those are all caring behaviors, and they do nothing but promote trust and promote that sense of connectedness.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know that in the discussions we've had the last 3 weeks as a panel, we've talked about anxiety quite a bit. And leaders are, in a situation like this, they need to provide, of course, structure, autonomy, and support. But the leader of the leading edge of that is support. And the fact that you were transparent, the fact that you thought out what the answers would be for your staff, the fact that you started with support instead of, we're going to have a meeting every Monday at 2 o'clock, because that doesn't work particularly in this situation, but in any situation where the emotion is overriding the cognitive skills. We need to take those things they need to do from a productive standpoint and break them down into little itty bitty pieces. But even that won't matter if you hadn't done what you did, Jim, which is transparent and offer support and say, hey, I don't even know what all the answers are either. So I think that the way and the order in which you handle that led to a staff that is not as anxious as they could have been.
Thank you. I hope that's the case.
And I think also, as you guys are highlighting it, one thing to look at is how what we're talking about with regards to feelings connects to how things regards to the needs, because I think that's what Cynthia's been highlighting is the needs. So the way we've been looking at needs is obviously you have things that drive performance, and you're looking at needs, and the dimensions of culture are really those elements that match to need. And so the more you align to those needs, the more you align to it. So what I think is really interesting is that if we come over and look at trust, as you guys have been talking about on the global basis, what we end up seeing is exactly what Cynthia's been looking for, is that by far and large, what everybody's looking for is support. And I think also when you're seeing it inside, but I think you can also see when you get inside and look at what Jim Erben's group is looking at in particular, you're going to see this, you see support as less. And I think that's in large part because he's already providing that support. So it's kind of an interesting dichotomy that the level of support inside compared to the global is much greater. It's the 3rd largest. Whereas when you look at it compared to Jim's group in particular, you're seeing that it's much more around results, community, or communication, clarity, around those types of elements. So I think what we're seeing is exactly the ramifications, that the more you're focused on anxiety, the more the need for support rises, but then also there becomes a shift towards communication and results. The one thing that I do know that Delish, you kind of talked about is the risk of nothing, which is when people say I don't need anything, kind of the implications of that, which is almost if you want to kind of highlight it, because I thought that was an interesting point you brought up when we debriefed this the other day.
Sure. Well, and just to kind of back it up, for the screen that you're on right now, we're looking at how these 4 dimensions of a culture, and we're looking at trust, communication, alignment, and focus, and how those 4 dimensions influence a culture dramatically. In my world, when we talk about what is a culture, we talk about it's the collection of behaviors of people within an organization. So do we behave in a trusting way? Do we communicate well? Are we in alignment with one another and what we believe in? And what is our focus in terms of how productive we are? So this screen right here allows us to look at Erben Associates as it relates to those 4 components of a culture. And what we understand about it is anything, a culture is fluid. So we did a really good job with, Jim had a great culture coming into the work that we did. We really strengthened that culture with some values and behaviors. And then, as I mentioned, then kind of the world tilted on its side and his group is dispersed. So it affects the work that's been done previously. And we know, and Jim, you talk a lot about in the absence of good communication, people do what?
Speculate.
They speculate. And they usually
communication comes speculation every time.
Right. And so in this dispersed workforce, there's a tendency for people to fill in the blanks with whatever information is available to them. So communication clearly is going to influence trust and alignment and our focus. So if you look at Will, the organization as a whole versus the non-management group, it just kind of show the difference in those two. It's clear that there are some issues that we can solve.
Yeah, and what we can do is we can look at, if you want to, this may be worthwhile, is to kind of do a blow up where you can see how Erben's group lines up against all, to kind of see how the mix is changing. So you can see overall, the trust factors. But if you want to focus particularly on the trust factors, what's nice about it is, what's interesting is on the trust factors, nothing is a factor that comes up with trust, and is kind of is kind of an interesting issue to think about, because people are asking for nothing. Are they just checking out? Are they just being neutral? Are they not? But what's interesting is I think the difference in how Erben's group, particularly if we look at the all submissions, and then if we look at the non-managers, you can see they're kind of reflective of the overall group. But I think the most interesting thing that I took away is if you look at the difference between senior leaders, and this is when you look at senior leaders, what senior leaders think and what senior leaders feel are important. You can see trust is a greater issue over here, or is a greater request for need in the global, and is less of a need within Erben's group, which is reflective of the additional steps. And again, back to Rob's point on anxiety.
So I'd like to make a comment on this, because obviously this is very new to me. Having a tool like this for your organization of, I don't care if it's 10 people or 1,000 people, 10,000 people, the ability to get, once you have a culture established, everybody has one, but once they have one that they embrace, and to be able to see this and to use people like you to help us, all of you on here, to help us figure out how to move the needle is huge, because you're not going to get this information candidly. I don't care how close your organization is, in my opinion. You can't call 100 people a day or every 2 weeks and ask them how they're doing on alignment, how they're doing on communication, how they're doing on focus, how they're doing on trust. It's just not doable. But this is a a way for them to communicate their true feelings, as opposed to me calling Rob, who's my direct report, and going, how do you feel about this? And I'm putting Rob's name right next to all of his answers. So this thing's going to be great. So this is really awesome.
Good, good, thank you. Will, because I can't, it's too small for me to read, but in Erben's, in the slide you're in right there, which category isn't represented? Because there aren't.
So the category that's not represented is alignment.
Okay, just because nothing came up.
Correct. And this is the slice. Yeah. So exactly, nothing came up. And like if you look at senior management, senior leader, yeah. So this is senior leader. So nothing came up for senior leaders. So when the senior leaders, there were no issues of need for alignment. Now, when you look at non-managers, there was some request for alignment. And if we go back to if we go back over here, we can break out what alignment is specifically. And the number one thing that came out of alignment, actually the only thing that came out of alignment, was really a request for clarity. That was a need that came out. And I think this gets back to some of what Rob and Cynthia have been talking about previously, is that clarity and communication it's not necessarily more, but how to be more effective about it. But that's what's coming out, is that of all the groups, is a need for clarity out of that. And you can see both managers and non-managers were looking for clarity.
And I would kick that back to Rob and Cynthia and say, given Erben's group, that's a small organization, but a very tight-knit organization that are dispersed, and I know your team well enough, Jim, to know they're all going to do fine, but they want to see one another. You guys like being together. So what would you suggest for Jim in terms of clarity in order to create some of that alignment?
Well, I'll take a stab at it. When I look at alignment is about, it's about communicating in such a way that your words and actions are completely reflective of what the purpose of the organization and the values are. And from a communication standpoint, we use a really simple model that came from the Army, and that's the leader's intent. So what is it that we have to accomplish? Why is it important relative to our purpose and our values? And then a very clear picture of what success looks like. And if you want to take it to an even higher level, you go to what we call team intent. And now everybody gets to participate in the conversation around what success looks like. Oftentimes, when you can pull other people into that conversation, when you start to define what the standard needs to be, if they have a voice in it, they'll up the bar on themselves. But when you can weave all that together, all of these pieces get addressed in that, just by having that simple format for communicating, and then they just grow the trust component.
And so, go ahead, Cynthia. I was just going to say, Rob, let me kick that back to Erben real fast, and we'll go to Cynthia. So, Jim, I know that the values and behaviors have been a core tenet of what your communication has been. How have you guys used the values and behaviors right now during this time to drive some of that clarity?
Every week, we have one of our key values, core values, if you will, and we have to describe examples of where it has been exhibited, whether teamwork, whether it's collaboration, esprit de corps, and we go around in our Monday meetings and give examples of it. You know, Dan and I worked on, help this client over, do this and this and this, or what have you. And so that's been fantastic. We do it every single week since the beginning of the year, up to today.
Good.
That's beautiful.
Well, back to you, Cynthia.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what I was going to speak to, was the core values, because Jim, I listened to the initial interview that Delise did with you, what seems like years ago, but I'm sure it was only 3 or 4 weeks ago. Yeah. And one of the things you said during that interview was one of the things that you ask when you speak to individuals every day, whoever you're speaking to, is you ask them, how have you exhibited our core values? So, and now you're saying, look, we were doing this in January. We didn't just start this because of this particular situation. How often do leaders say to you, Well, how, that's part of our core value, is it not? How are you demonstrating that? That doesn't happen every day in every organization. That I would venture to say that doesn't happen every day in most organizations. So if we're going to talk about an upside to this type of situation, then asking what our core values are, how are we living them, is awesome. It's awesome, and it's empowering to individuals, because the clarity of where their positive emotion is right there.
Thank you.
If I could piggyback that for a second, well stated, Cynthia. As we have been working and doing culture assessments, those Polaroid snapshots of hundreds of organizations, almost invariably, and Jim, you'd be a huge outlier, like as Cynthia just alluded, huge outlier by virtue of the fact that you are not only talking about the values, but you're creating pictures of what they look like in action. The vast majority of organizations, well over 90%, the lowest scoring questions in the culture assessment are almost always the purpose of the organization is not emphasized and discussed regularly. The values of the organization are not emphasized and discussed regularly. And the number 3, we don't really understand what the senior leader's trying to accomplish. Makes sense. And what's even more ironic is when you look at the highest scoring question, or one of the top 2 highest scoring questions, always, the purpose and values of the organization are important to me. So the fact that you're talking about it every week, you are tapping into one of the most important deep-seated components of your culture. They want to know what it looks like when we're actually walking our own talk.
Wow. Unfortunately, I do have to agree with you, Rob. We look around, we go into various companies, and they don't have that. They don't have a tight-knit culture. Now, there are some that have amazing cultures. One of the things that I truly feel about my staff right now is I think they would give me the shirt off their back because of our culture, and they know how much we care. And it reminds me, and I am in no means putting myself anywhere in this league, but Herb Kelleher, at some point, Delise, you can probably speak to it, there was a gasoline price hike that was just really hurting the airline. And, I don't think they have ever furloughed anybody, but at that time, I think there was just an employee that went to HR and said, hey, I want to put together a drive to payroll deduct funds out of our own, paychecks to help with the fuel crisis. And, I would like to think that the employees would give me the shirt off their back because they've exhibited that before. I'm not, if there any of them are listening, I'm not asking for this, by the way, but anyway, it's just culture is king, especially now going through these crises.
Well, your story, Jim, is true. I was there when that happened. It was called Fuel from the Heart. And over 80% of employees took money out of their paycheck to go into a bank account to help the airline buy fuel. So it was unheard of. And people would do things for that organization that we never dreamt that they would do. So, but you do that kind of culture where your people will give more to you than you would ever dream of asking for them. It's really it's what we all aspire toward. And I do agree that your team is in with that echelon of cultures where they care about each other. And that's what we want to make sure that we maintain through this. Some of the organizations that we work with have decided this is a good time to rewrite my culture, which I think is great. And the leadership perception is one of the things that this tool helps us to understand. So you being able to understand what your group is going through. Will, if you can go to the perception gap slide, I think it's important because it's not just Erben's group, but what we find is that what we think as senior leadership is worrying our teams isn't necessarily what the data is showing. So Will, do you want to talk to that a little bit?
Well, before you do that, Delise, I do want to give a shout out back to that earlier reference. Two of my largest advisors have left money in the company to help us survive. Significant money owed them in the company to help us get through these times. So it's not fuel, it's called continued operations. But shout out to you two, you know who you are, and just wanted to say thank you. So anyway, go ahead.
Good. Thank you.
So I think the biggest thing when you start to look at, oops, did I lose my screen or is it back? There we go. So the biggest thing to take a look at, and I apologize everybody, the gardeners have just decided to across the street mow the lawn very loudly next door. So here, that's what's going on in the new But what we've been doing is looking at the senior level bias, because that's one of the biggest issues is what senior leaders perceive compared to non-managers. And so what I think is most interesting when you look at the comparison overall, and this is just on the feeling scale, and we can look at the performance scale, which is really an indicator of need and culture. But senior leaders overall are feeling distancing. Not one senior leader reported any type of feeling or perception of feeling among the workforce that was connecting. In other words, bringing it together. It was very much distancing, 100%. So the whole group, and this is 2 weeks worth of data because we update it every 2 weeks. So over the last 2 weeks, it's distancing, and distancing is the same for all organizations as well as Erben's organization. But when you look at the non-managers, the workforce, you'll see that here it's 28% is actually feeling somewhat positive or expressing positive connecting types of feelings. And in Erben's group, it's 5 points higher, it's 33%. So you can see that overall the connecting feelings. So I think what this really highlights, and where I think the real benefit and why senior lead having visibility to this and having the difference is you can start to look at, okay, maybe things aren't as bad as what I'm feeling. My workforce is feeling a little better. Now, how do I tap into those feelings? And then how do I move them? And then when you look at the performance index, where what we're really looking at is, what are the elements of need by dimension of culture? Where are the needs falling? Again, here you're going to see on the senior leaders, if you look at the senior leaders to managers, there's actually a much closer alignment in terms of, and this is just Erben's group overall, that overall 33% of the senior leadership in Erben's organization is saying, okay, we need to focus on trust. And that's reflective of, the needs are reflective, and it's 28% within the non-managers. The only point of difference is just the alignment. So there's 15% of the organizations that is looking for alignment, or those areas that would help them align the culture dimension of alignment. And when you look at what that is, when we come back and we just look at what that alignment factor is, here you'll see that it's clarity. So I think the only thing that they're looking for is just a little bit more clarity. And I know there's transparency, but I think this gets back to, what type of clarity are we looking for? Is it do it a little bit better planning? Is it a little bit better? What am I doing today? But that's how I just think that's what I love doing numbers, and I like breaking down data. And this is where I think using these really cool Einstein analytic dashboards allows us to kind of highlight visually, here's an area for you to work on. Or if it was a recommendation, I'm not the experts in this. I build dashboards and make them technology work. But if you guys want to touch on kind of like just highlighting this point of clarity, because it's the only point within the senior bias where there's a gap from Erben's perspective.
Okay.
So if you think about it this way, people have been saying this for 10 years, that the last true competitive advantage is your people, it's your culture. And it's even more accentuated in the last month as people have realized, holy smoke, this Zoom phenomenon is a real thing. The barriers to entry for anybody to get into virtually any industry comes so far down as the access to technology and analytics has virtually disappeared. Somebody from their living room can start any kind of business now. And we're all recognizing it, and people are rushing to actually do it in the last 3 weeks. And really, the culture, how your people feel, and what stories they say when they start to speculate, which is going to drive their behaviors, is the only thing that is going to be an advantage if you can harness it. But you can't harness it if you can't measure it and realize and play to those things that people actually need to feel empowered, to feel safe, to feel that trust.
Okay, and so I had a conversation with Delise earlier in the week, and she put it the best way that I've heard anybody put it for a long time. I mean,
Better than me?
Okay, Rob, I take that back. Just for that day, she did it better than anybody else I've ever heard. We've had our businesses for years, and early on, it's very difficult to even conceive of 30 years ago being able to measure productivity or to measure culture. So one of the things Delise said to me was, in those times it was anecdotal. And leaders don't really want to make decisions around anecdotal. This tool gives us the ability to see the empirical data, to use the data to drive and improve whatever we need to improve. I mean, think about it. Leaders already, the upside of all of this is that leaders of organizations have mission, vision, value statements. Maybe this is a great time to go review them. Maybe it's a great time to assess with empirical information how well that's working in your organization. Not to say, okay, we've got big problems in this association or in this organization, but to say, let me zero in on how I can improve, how we as an organization can improve, because we have the information here. And how do we adjust? Maybe we need to adjust. Maybe we need to revisit our core values and our mission and vision and values.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think, Jim, when I work with executives, if I were to give this information and say, we need some more clarity around your communication, my guess is your feedback would be, I think I'm pretty clear right now. Would you agree with that?
Well, absent this data, yes, I would agree with that.
Right. So the question becomes, yes, I know you're communicating as much as you think you need to, but we're still seeing that your employees are left with some questions out there. So it allows us to pinpoint what are the things that we can fix, so that we're not going to fix everything. It'll be moving on to the next issue at hand. But if we know right now that our employees are feeling a lack of clarity or feeling anxious around that, then there's an easy solution to be able to solve that.
But how do you know before this? How do you know, like, to your point, I think I've been provided plenty of clarity.
Right.
So how do I know before this? I mean, you had no idea. Half your organization could have been missing clarity, and you just thought you were, how many business owners don't think they're clear? They all are clear, that, and the whole gamut that's out there. But you see something like this. I mean, I've been taking notes about things that I need to focus on from this data.
Well, I'd love to hear from Delise and Cynthia. I can tell you that over the course of my career, I can count on maybe one hand out of hundreds of CEOs that I've worked with, the number where there was alignment between the quality and the clarity of communication that the CEO thought that they were providing and what the workforce actually thought that they were getting. It's almost ubiquitous that the workforce says, you don't communicate with us. And the senior leaders say, all we do is communicate. And the problem is the quality, the clarity, and the conciseness. It's amazing the number of CEOs, if you give them a microphone and say, can you make a few remarks? 30 minutes later, they haven't drawn their first breath.
Yep. Oh, it's so true.
And I think that in this particular situation, because the three of us talked about the word communication prior, and we agreed that it's not really about more communication, it's about more effective communication. And to be effective, you need to climb into more specificity. And under these set of circumstances, that specificity, you really have to put a fine point on it. And I don't think there's anything wrong in saying, okay, I thought I was clear on this, but tell me, do you still have questions? Is something still missing? Because in my line of work, if it's gray information going out, it's going to be gray information coming back. It's not going to be clear at all. So I think it's the level of clarity about being specific about what is it that, this 15% that Will showed on the chart, it's getting down to that level of specifics. Yes, you probably were really specific and you probably did have clear communication, Jim, in your viewpoint without question, but there's still this inkling of something wasn't addressed that was probably more specific than you imagined.
Yes, without question. I think in further applications for this, one of the things that we do when we're helping people figure out what they want to do with their businesses is we spend a lot of time in executive retention. And frequently there's a disconnect just after we interview if it was the four of you, we go through an interview and Paul, our planner, will come to me and he'll say, they're really aligned, or man, it's all over the board. And by introducing them to tools like this, we can help the CEO better align their key executives, which will also better align the workforce. And it'll be much more effective and much more engaged to retain with the company.
Well, and Jim, you've been about culture before you and I had ever spoken, because I think in your world, if your clients have a strong culture, their exit strategy is easier, their succession strategy is easier. So you know well. To Rob's earlier point, yes, in the 30 plus years that I've been doing this work, I've never had an organization say, we are communicated to perfectly and we get it. So I think, and no matter how well we do, there's still more that we can do. But I think also to Cynthia's point, it's more about the questions that we ask than about the information that we share. So as executives, and especially right now, I would want to know, what kind of questions are you asking, Jim, of your employees? So you call them up, I assume you have kind of one-on-ones either once a day or once a week, whatever that is. What kind of questions do you ask them to find out how they're doing? Because I think just a how are you isn't really enough in this context.
I mean, how are you? That's a canned question. You're going to get a canned answer. I want to know, what can I do to help you be more successful this week? What do you need from me? What are we missing that could move the needle as it relates to your focus? What is something that we're not doing that we should do? And tell me about it. We'll go figure out a way to do it. But whatever you need from me, just call me, text me, whatever, and I'm there. Whether you need me on a call, whether you need me to help you think through some stuff. Right now, I think that has, well, with some exception, I think that has been the most helpful is, asking the questions of, and I want to find out about their family and how they're dealing with stuff because, it's important. I mean, some of them have kids at home. One of them has a brand new baby at home. He was coming off maternity leave when this happened. So, it's been really fun actually, but I kind of want to know what's going on at home. How are things? And it's more of a, what can I do to support?
And one of the things that we've done just to highlight that, like for example, on clarity and communication is to be able to break it down even further. And this is something that you can look at it, and then I'll just briefly do it just so nobody can see it, but you can actually toggle to see what the feedback is. So you can see here, Jim is doing a great job. My frustration is, and it'll actually go into details. So you can actually, not by category, you can also then go look at kind of what the feedback is that's stimulating this.
Back to that.
Okay.
Here he goes.
My frustration is more being remote and therefore, okay. All right, that's understandable.
Yeah, and then there's some more information about what would be useful. But that's, yeah. I think one of the cool things about what we're able to do here is you can start to say, okay, on result side, what is it? What's the feedback? What are they looking for? And I think that, to Cynthia's point and to Delisa's point, that can kind of help frame the open-ended question of not only is it clarity, but what's the caliber of clarity that I need? So we look at, we can do the same thing for clarity, but this way you can actually toggle the feedback and then use it to help address the open-ended questions. Because I think the more pinpointed, I think someone brought up the point, might have been Cynthia, that you have to, as you refine, as you learn, you got to be more pinpointed. But this will just help. It's just an interesting ability. Again, I like building these tools, but I think this is how summary data feelings to needs, and then you can get into action, because with these little, with the you can actually know what type of question to ask and how to ask and engage your people. So it's one of those types of things I thought was interesting.
One of the things that
we
really
are,
helped us,
oh, go ahead.
since we started this, was we had a consultant who will remain nameless who suggested that we outline everybody's objectives at the beginning of the week, what they're going to get done, their tasks. And then we all report back to one another as a group on what you've accomplished with those tasks. So thank you, Delise, for that idea, because it's worked extremely well.
Good, good. Well, and from a productivity standpoint, Cynthia, what advice would you have in terms of keeping people productive in Erben's experience right there? What's your thought?
So, you know, we've got the emotional writing roughshod over my to-do list and my priorities and so on and so forth, yet we still need to get work done, right? I've found that really what people can do, what employees can do, cannot do the volume of necessarily what they did. They need to break it down into much smaller bites about what is my goal for today? What is my priority for today? Did I schedule it? And at the end of the day, did I measure it? Because the anxiety is still running roughshod up here. But if you do that every day, then you keep moving forward. So I would say the same things any good time manager would do to be productive, they keep doing, but they're doing it in smaller components, smaller bites. We're not talking about, you know, the strategic plan for 2021 right now. So it would be the same practices and habits that good, productive time managers do, but again, in smaller bites, because they can't handle, for many reasons, anything above and beyond that. But that, you know, I talk about goals, priorities, and schedules. I call about GPS with my clients. And, you know, if you don't understand your goal, your priority, and have you scheduled doing something with that and then measured it, then you're not going to see at the end of the day an accomplishment, because you don't have the external contextual cues to say, oh, hey, Cynthia, did you do that? What was your objective? It's self-regulating in this type of environment. Anybody who's working at home is self-regulating. So they need to have their goals and then see their progress day by day. Little things day by day add up to a week.
It's interesting. I had a client yesterday say, I know I did a lot of work today, but I didn't see any progress because I was on the phone a lot. I didn't feel like I made progress, but I know I did. And I think that we can feel that way in this universe that we're living in right now. And Jim, I know you do a good job because you ask it of me. What did you do to move the needle today? So asking your employees, what happened today in your world that you felt you moved the needle, so that people do start to feel, I think it releases some of that anxiety to say, okay, my boss does care and I did move the needle. And even if you didn't move it that much, Jim's usually always good about saying, you know, you'll move it tomorrow, or give some word of encouragement as well.
But if Jim can't,
they don't like it when they don't move the needle. Not one single person in the organization. I mean, and there are days when, I mean, you'd have to be stretching to say you moved the needle. I mean, it just happens.
Right.
And it bothers them when they don't feel like they've moved the needle, as it bothers me when I don't feel like I've moved the needle.
Well, you have that in your culture then, Jim, and it's been going on for a while, and that's terrific to hear. But working from home and not speaking to you every day, that's the question they need to ask themselves to see that they accomplish something at the end of the day, so that progress or measurement doesn't become like a non-word or a dirty word. It needs to be something that they ask themselves every day as a matter of habit, so that they can take the time to step back from the anxiety and the lack of clarity and reflect on, what did I accomplish today? Most of the time they're surprised.
Okay. Interesting.
It's kind of scary if you're saying that we need Jim Erben in our ear every day, even if he's not there. It's kind of a scary thought, but.
No one has ever said that.
Maybe we could make a sign. We could make a sign. What would Jim ask?
I'm writing a book of
things
that people have never said when they left my presence, and that was, I wish he'd talk more. That's one of them.
But I think just to highlight what we're seeing is, to Cynthia's point, you know, here you see anxious, uncertain, and scared are the top three kind of feelings. This is the global perspective. but then right behind it is that stressed, overwhelmed, and frustrating. So you're starting to see that dichotomy. And I think what'll be interesting to see is how this shifts, because I think some of this stressed, overwhelmed, and frustrated, as people get more comfortable working from home and get more comfortable with the situation, may start to overtake some of the anxiousness as we start to get.
I think we've seen that. I think we've seen that.
As a member of the culture think tank, will we/I have access to the global? Because I'd always be interested to see where I stack up compared to the.
Everybody, yeah, no, that's the one thing that we want to, analytics, it's all about trying to get people the insight. So everybody who joins in it can get access to the global data set for all of them. And we didn't even get into the detailed breakdown, but you can get the global set for the detailed breakdown as well. But, and then everybody also will get, just like you did, get your 3 poll questions, one for manager, non-managers, and senior leaders. But if you don't send it out and you don't collect data, you won't have this information. But everybody always gets the global. And I think at least the general feedback and what I find most interesting is just the comparatives, where I can see how am I doing against the globals, because that kind of just gives me a sense of, am I alone? Am I not alone? Because I think a lot of CEOs out there, and this is really from a design perspective, what I'm after. And I think is just, okay, how do I compare to everybody else? Okay. And then is there an opportunity where I can, what's my leader bias look like? And okay, so I don't have to necessarily that negativity or the clarity, but it allows you to see kind of where you stand against everybody else. And then collectively, it provides the opportunity. And I know Rob's hosting one where senior leaders can come together and talk about very specific points. Like, okay, you know what, right now, we're all dealing with anxiety. So collectively, how do we work together? What are best practices, and share? Because I think as senior leaders, the one thing that's consistent in almost every company is there's one CEO and there's one president and very few senior leaders. So, to be able to share and learn amongst yourself, I think is helpful. And this is what this is meant to do, is just kind of highlight. But yeah, everybody gets the global, so you can always see the global, but you do have to, send out it's really easy to send out the poll questions. You just, copy, we give you a subject line and everything. All you have to do is just copy and paste it and send it to your teams to fill out every 2 weeks. That gives you the insights.
Well, I would like to, I love the banter that we have every week. So I'm going to take exception, Will, and I'm going to say that I see the advantage in this dashboard, not so much in comparison to the global, because what's important is where's my organization trending? And if the word cloud is saying that my people are feeling overwhelmed, there's the metric. Because if my people are overwhelmed, they're not optimized their performance. But if I can pull the levers, whatever they may be, to where that sense of anxiety and feeling overwhelmed, those shrink, my ability to perform is going to go up. And it may be something where, as Cynthia talks about, the ability to be organized and prioritize, that may mean that the things I'm going to do are going to be like at 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock at night after my kids have gone to bed. Or it may be, in my situation, 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. when no emails or phone calls are coming in. And that's where I'm going to be able to have metrics that I can leverage. And I would look at the global at that point. That becomes my competitive bar. Wow, look how far ahead I am pulling ahead of my competitors. That's what I see.
All right, so we are now at the kind of closing out on the hour. So if anybody wants to ask a question, you can go to the questions, and there's questions already. So I will pass it off to Grant, who is our producer, who's helping us with this, because he can read them and I can't because the font's so small. But Grant, if you want to start reading off a few of the questions, and then we'll close with those.
Sure. Thanks, Will. So we've got a number of audience questions, and I'm going to kind of synopsize some of them. And so there's a couple here that kind of seem to speak to the same point, or getting at the same thing. And there's one that's, when you talk about culture as behaviors, how do you reconcile as a senior leader the discrepancy between the uncertainty and doubt in your own head versus trying to instill positivity and be reassuring to your workforce. And then there's another, it's kind of rephrased, I guess, as I could rephrase that as like, how do you address the fears and anxieties in your workforce when you're right there with them as a senior leader? And then there's a second question that's really similar, I think. And it says, when we're dealing with clarity of communication, how do you avoid putting out gray or slushy information to your workforce when the information and data available to you is actually pretty gray and slushy? So I'll throw those first couple out. And
all right, let me take a quick stab, because I think that behaviors question is where my world intersects, and then it's going to probably kick naturally over to Rob. Right now, I think what we have to do, your culture is about your behavior. So it's how we behave with one another. It's how we behave with our clients, and that the culmination of that becomes our culture. So it is fluid. It's changing over time. The thing that we have to do right now is build trust. So the best way for us to build trust right now is, as Jim had said earlier, he's going to be very candid with his people. And part of that candor is, I don't know. I'm scared too. And here are the things that we can do together to ensure our success. So if we have that trust, then our culture will be intact. And I think it's okay not to know all of the answers. And I think it's okay to say, I'm worried about it too. And here's a solution, here's an answer. And then asking for your team. You guys tell me what we can do. Not just making it leader-led, but make it a very consensual kind of conversation.
Ditto.
Rob?
I would say I would have said exactly the same thing. So in the interest of time, I won't.
I think you have to lead, and I think you have to lead in these times more than any time, and you have to inspire confidence in your staff that you're going to survive and thrive. And I tell them those two words every single day. I'm a General Patton disciple, and I can promise you he had no doubt about them overcoming the Germans. And we're going to survive, and we're going to thrive.
And I agree with that. I have some clients who are going to have to lay off. So some people won't necessarily, they'll survive, but they may not survive under your banner. So it does become a question of, if I tell everyone that we're going to be okay, and then I lay people off, that's a hard thing for me to do. But I do need to lead. I need to say, if I need to exit somebody out, I want to do as an organization the best I can to have them have a place to go. If they need to, if it's the unemployment office, that's at least something I can help them with. Or can I transition them to another job? Can I help them in some way so that they don't feel like they just got left in the middle of this? So it's a hard time, but I do think that, to Jim's point, we lead, and I think that we lead through candor and communication and a lot of it. And that it's as clear as it can be. And the only way that we know clarity is defined by the receiver. So I can't be clear unless I know what you need clarity around. So it's about asking a lot of questions to make sure that I'm answering it in the way that makes sense to you or provide some help to you.
Okay. Thanks. That was great. The next question is on the discussion of core values and what they look like in action. How do you suggest dealing with people who, on the surface, say they embrace a core value, such as like teamwork or collaboration, but behind the scenes they're actually toxic or disruptive and are not acting in accordance with those core values?
We hire to values, we performance manage to values, and we fire to values. And if we don't do that, then you don't have organizational values and behaviors. So if it's an opportunity for people to decide, this isn't an organization for me, if this is the way that we're going to align ourselves. And I have plenty of clients who just have, it gives us, what it allows us to do is, I can have a top performer who treats people poorly. But their performance number is good, but they're leaving carnage in the way. And I suggest that they're not performing as well as you think they are if they're doing that with other people. So we let them go. We love them out the door, is what we say.
It becomes it's a fabulous leadership tool, because now you can go back and, with that same candor that we need to communicate with people in the crisis, we can coach to the values, and you can just be very candid. Hey, Tom, when you do this, it completely undermines our core value of trust or our core value of collaboration or teamwork. And now they know, wow, that particular picture of my behavior is the antithesis of what we stand for. It's a really simple and powerful coaching tool.
And to that point, Rob, if you just have organizational values, but you don't have behaviors that give a description of what that value looks like, I would encourage you to do that. Because if integrity is our value, if I say integrity to a group of 20 people, there are 20 different descriptions and understanding of what integrity looks like. So describing the behaviors, defining them for your employees gives a roadmap to say, when we say integrity here, this is what it looks like and this is what we mean. So people are very clear around, okay, I get that. I understand what that looks like behaviorally.
And that's a great example of specificity. Get as specific as possible around that you want to change.
I love doing an exercise where you have everybody in the room or in small groups, and you ask the question, name a time when somebody lived this particular value. I want to know the name. I want to know the story. And I want to know the impact. How did it make people feel? How did it impact the company? Then the converse of it. And you typically don't do this other than in the first time when we're actually establishing the values. I want to know about a time, and I don't care who the person was, but I want to have the story because I want to visualize it when this value was not lived. And it could be as simple as, somebody took the last cup of coffee and didn't make another pot. And that undermined the value of, teamwork. But I want people to have really clear pictures in their mind also of what happens when we're not living it, because then they've got that Rolodex in their memory. And when they start walking toward a situation where that could have a bad outcome, that might undermine our values, I will stay away from it. It's nice to have stories that speak to the good as well as the antithesis.
And I think that's also part of what, as we've been drawing these dashboards up, part of what we're trying to do on the design and the analytics side is to be able to demonstrate the impact. Because when you can see like this, you can see managers, non-managers, and senior leaders. And if you see managers and you see the need or the feelings from the non-managers, it's a way to quantify and help some people like, well, I don't think this is a big deal. It could be that they're not necessarily trying to be negative. It just could be they just don't recognize the importance or the significance. So I think as this can also be a tool now where you can say, look, this is what you're doing. Here's the feedback that we're hearing. And as a result of that, you're causing anxiety. Just to pick on the biggest one right now. So what you're doing right now is actually building anxiety, and that's what you need to relax. And then you can go, oh, I didn't realize, okay, I get it now. And now you have the numbers to support it. And I think with the coaching points and then the numbers and the visualization, that can help people better figure out how to align and align to the culture and recognize the importance of it. But then, ultimately, to Lisa's point, if you have people that just resist it flat out and just don't care and continue to do it even though everything's there, then you got to love them out the door, as Elise said. But I do think having some of these numbers and having some of these insights can be a coaching tool to help people recognize that, yeah, this is really it because it's visualized. And I think sometimes that visualization can help people get over the hump.
Now we've got 2 more questions left. I do recognize that we are at about an hour. So if anybody absolutely needs to drop, we will be posting the recording of this later. But I think there's a couple of pretty good questions here. So if you want to stick around, we'll go ahead and address them. Here's one that says, it looks like we've been doing these for a few weeks now. So it says, from last week's discussion, you all talked about us as leaders needing to shift gears and relax our oversight and extend more trust to our now remote from home workforce. I'm not sure if this is a question as much as an observation I was hoping you could speak to, but especially true of our employees with families. It almost seems as though their families have become an extended part of our organizational culture.
I'm not sure I hear the question.
Well,
I'm not sure if there's a question in there or if they're just wanting you to speak to if you feel that trying to find the question in there.
Relaxing that relaxing piece around how much are we managing our employees through this? And I think we talked last week and the previous week about it's less about what people accomplished on the day-to-day and looking more on a horizon basis. And Jim, you spoke to it the last time we talked, that a lot of your people don't have daily goals, but they have more long-term projects that you can check in on. And the course of the day might not be 8 to 5, given what's happening in people's homes. So I do think we need to continue to view differently how we manage day-to-day performance and how we manage day-to-day needle moving, but it might be more weekly. What do you think, Jim?
I would agree with that. I mean, by the way, they're officing in their house as required by federal mandate. We're supposed to be staying at home and locked down. So I would embrace the family of your employee and not be critical of it. I would, as far as holding people accountable, you still have to hold them accountable, but whether or not they're working, to Rob's point, from, God forbid I did it, from 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. or whatever. He's got to do what he's got to do to get the job done. And when it's quiet, and it's not an 8 to 5 world we're living in anymore, especially during this pandemic. It's just not reality.
Long before 4/1, the world had already gotten to a place where the peak performing organizations were not micromanaging. They were creating the clarity that Cynthia talks about. They were establishing the clear expectation of the objective and what it's going to look like, what success is going to look like. And they were backing the hell out of the how, and empowering people, trusting people to get the how done and figure it out, because they're the ones that are turning the wrench every day. They know better than anybody how to do it. We just have to have clear expectations and let them go ahead and go about their business.
Yeah, I think it's a reset of expectations with maybe a little bit more specificity around what it looks like now, because by virtue of the fact that they're working from home, they're autonomous. And by the virtue of the fact that they're autonomous, it's making some managers uncomfortable. How do I know that they're going to do what they need to do? Every piece of research out there says that we are only productive about 3 hours a day. Nobody who's supervising somebody at home is capable of knowing when those 3 hours are going to happen, but they do have a realistic approach and an understandable approach to say, what will that look like for Friday's meeting, or something like that? Something that says, okay, how are you going to do, not how so much, but what is it that you're setting up to try to get to this? This is where we need to go. I'll leave it up to you to do that, and let that person deal with their productivity and what they need to do to get there without checking every little box.
Well, and I think this is something that's been building for years now, where we have middle-level managers, leaders, senior leaders even, that are having almost an existential crisis of control.
Yeah.
Because they feel like their value is based on their level of control of the people that are under their leadership, and instead not recognizing the opportunity to empower people and facilitate their success and be more of the coach. They don't have to be that heroic Russell Crowe guy that's got all the answers and is leading everything. I want to be the person that's making sure that the people that work for me or report to me, they have the tools and the space they need to get things done.
Yeah.
Actually, this last question is just a perfect segue into where that kind of observation led to, okay, so they're saying that we're actually doing something similar to what Jim Erben is doing in his organization, and also along the lines of what Cynthia was speaking to, of having employees set their own goals day by day or at the start of the week. One thing I've noticed is that certain employees seem to be getting frustrated with themselves, feeling like they haven't gotten enough done. And I guess, kind of reading between the lines here, it looks like they're saying that employees are measuring themselves against what they could do prior to the crisis, against what they can do now, and they're trying to measure themselves now against, our previous kind of paradigm. I guess the question there is, are you all seeing this in the organizations you work with? And how do you address this issue of not just the managers, but also the employees themselves, trying to right-size their expectations of themselves?
I'll
think
take a
about-
stab at
Go
that.
ahead.
I think first of all, you need to determine if they need additional resources, if they need you as a CEO or senior leader. I also think that, we are in a reset mode. It was real clear that we're not going to be there's not a lot of people running to us as new clients today. They're all hunkering down. And so I think we all had to go reset our goals and expectations of what we were going to do over the next 30, 60, and 90 days. We don't know how long this is going to last. We don't know what it's going to look like on the outside, but what we have to do is take care of our existing clients and get the job done that they've hired us to do. And if you need more resources to do that, fine. But you're not going to be like you were in January and February because we're in a new world.
I agree.
And
I think the question too is, as a group, what does success look like? What would success look like? And then for each person, we help you define what would be success for you this day, this week, this month. And then people they know what moving the needle looks like. They know what a successful day looks like, so that people do understand that. And that we don't, and I'm guilty of it because all of my colleagues here on the panel can know that our Saturdays and Sundays look a lot like our Mondays and Tuesdays. So, and if we continue to do that, then we get burned out and we're not any good for anybody. So being able to, Rob and I, between 3 and 5 can communicate with each other because we're awake. But Saturdays and Sundays is the same thing, that if we're asking that of our employees and we're saying, let's meet on Saturday, let's meet on Sunday, I would just kind of be aware that also leads to a lack of feeling productive because I don't ever feel like I get to recharge my battery. So giving them an opportunity to turn their computer off, turn their screen off, and go be with your family and enjoy that time.
I think what you said, Jim, I think is absolutely on mark. This is a reset. The way the entire world operates has changed in the last 3 weeks. There's no corner of the globe, no industry that hasn't been affected. We're making the adjustment, and we're going to sort it out. And there are a lot of things that are coming into play, and everybody's saying, well, you got to write your book now, and you got to learn how to play the guitar, and people are feeling all of these stresses and all these pressures at the same time that their 3-year-old that used to be at daycare during the day, and their 12-year-old that's got to be on their own Zoom classroom schedule, and their spouse is trying to work in the other room, and the dog that used to be at doggy daycare is running all over the place. Everybody's still sorting it out. I think we need to give ourselves a little bit of self-compassion and lighten up a little bit on ourselves, because we're sorting it out, and it's amazing how quickly people are doing that. They are making that adjustment.
I think we're at the stage now, Rob, that people are, as you said, starting to figure it out. They're beginning to figure it out. But if the anxiety level is still up there, then we go back to the leader asking the questions. How did you feel you did last week? What did you feel you accomplished last week that maybe you didn't expect, or whatever? And then start to ask those questions. Why are you feeling? How are you feeling about the fact that you're claiming you didn't do as much as you expected to do? Give yourself a break. This is an unusual, once in a lifetime situation. Let's sit down and regroup and see what that looks like over a 5-day period, and break them down, get them to be smaller little chunks. It's about asking the questions to open the discussion, to get the specifics, so that you can help reset the expectations for that employee, so they can begin again without, give themselves a break, so they can just give themselves a break.
And I think that's a good way to end it, to give ourselves a break as well. So definitely appreciate all the people's input. That's going to close up our event for today, where we definitely appreciate Jim's participation and your willingness to share your insights.
Thank you for inviting.
Oh, thank you so much. And next week, we'll hopefully be able to introduce another person to discuss their numbers over and discuss their insights and see how we can help and what we're unearthing during this new normal. So thank you, everybody.
Stay safe.
Everybody.
Thank you. Stay safe, y'all. Bye.